Hello and welcome to Chapter 12 of the King's Indian Masterclass. Today, we're looking at the London system. This is going to conclude our masterclass here, and this is the final thing that we have to tackle. So, just a little bit about the differences in the London, because this is a very unique system. White doesn't even go for c4, d4, and e4. They put their pawns on e3 and c3. They play a little bit more passively. Additionally, their bishop comes to f4. And for the reasons that I just said, they're more passive and their bishop's on f4, we want to strike immediately. We want to go for e5 because it comes with tempo and it tries to take initiative, which we are justified in taking because they are so passive. So e5 is our main target, our main idea. That's the basic concept. The other really only distinction to take notice of, because the pawn is not on c4, this square and this diagonal in general is in white's control a little bit more. And there's ideas of queen b3 and bishop c4, both of which can come with check if you ever play f5. So what you're going to see in this video is that once f5 is played, black often voluntarily puts their king on h8 to just preemptively get rid or get away from all of these ideas, which sometimes could be annoying if you're not prepared for them. So those are kind of the two distinctions. Aside from that, I mean, we're playing very similarly. As you noticed, we have the same setup: knight f6, g6, bishop g7, castles, and d6, and we're going for the same idea, the same developing scheme. So let's go ahead and begin our exploration into the London system by looking at what we play after they play h3. Now, h3 is kind of to stop bishop g4, which otherwise is a very good square for our bishop to be. We're going to develop the knight to c6. And again, the basic idea we want is e5, but we don't want, after they play, for example, knight b to d2, the normal London system move, we don't want to waste the move with the rook to prepare e5, because the rook wants to be on the f-file many times, because we're usually launching f5. We're still going for this King's Indian expansion. So the rook on f8 usually is actually well placed. So we don't want to dedicate the rook to the job of preparing e5. We're instead going to play knight to d7, retreating the knight, but now opening up the bishop and the knight, so we have tons of control, and e5 is inevitable. So, after knight to d7, they continue with knight to c4, trying to control e5 a little bit from white's perspective, but we launch with e5, takes, and the bishop comes to h2. And here e4, and we end up having a trade on e5, bishop takes e5, bishop takes e5, and we reach a very slow middle game position. A lot of trades have happened. These are one type of positions that you might see, where we didn't really get our kingside attack because white played in a way where they just traded everything on e5 once we played e5. That's kind of the first major cornerstone of this sort of system, where we don't really want to force the issue now. We can still go for f5 and f4 at some point, but very often it's not going to be as effective with so many pieces off the board. But we have the two bishops, we have the safe king already castled, a bit more of development. We have a nice pawn on e4 controlling and limiting the squares of the bishop. We're doing completely fine. And as you can see from this game with Fianchetto with the black side, black really has no trouble, right? We get a tempo on the queen. Now, this is sort of what I was talking about. This pressure along this diagonal is one of the unique things to the London system with the pawn not on c4. That's the thing you really have to keep an eye out for. But aside from that, I mean, black is totally fine here. We've already more than equalized. And black, in fact, is pushing now for even more. So what you end up seeing is a trade of the bishops, a trade of the knights, a trade of the rooks, and an endgame which is dead equal, but one where black, if anyone, does have practical chances. Objectively, white can hold, but practically, black's king is a little bit closer into the action. The pawn structure is a little bit better for black. You can see this ruined f-pawns. The h-pawn is now a passer, and so trading queens would not have been very advantageous. White keeps the queens on the board, but you can see that black slowly pushes that h-pawn, makes progress, and eventually puts up some serious threats. Now, white eventually wins this h-pawn, but for the cost of a couple of their pawns, and eventually, I mean, black totally crashes in. There's pressure on all of these pawns now, and black is winning, white resigned. Now, this was just one example, and you can see that we didn't really get much of a struggle in the middle game. So we're going to now look at a secondary game, which started after knight to c6, right through the opening. Bishop h2 was played, kind of preparing for e5, after which bishop h2 is the move, and knight to d7 and e5. Now, in this game here, you see more of a typical struggle that you're very familiar with in the King's Indian, where black is going to play on the king side. But I did want to start with that kind of slower, possibly more boring game example, because it is something that I expect many of you will see, where white, in the face of the King's Indian, just decides to trade everything on e5, and you can't really do much about it. But if they keep the pieces on the board, f5, we're going for our attack, e5 as well, you can see that we're the ones initiating some pressure. Now, you can really see this diagonal highlighted here. So at some point, moving the king to h8 is something that you want to keep in mind and consider. And indeed, after f4, castles, a5 was played, just expanding a little and stopping white from expanding completely on that side of the board. But king h8, and this is what I was talking about, slowly getting out of the sight of this bishop, also possibly preparing this square for the rook. This is a very thematic idea we've seen many times in the King's Indian. And now, black is just crashing through. And indeed, I mean, this is very much in the spirit of the King's Indian. You can see that we're just going for full-out expansion. And these are the type of positions that I think, if you've enjoyed this masterclass thus far, you're going to enjoy these positions, because it's the same spirit that we've seen, where you're just crashing through and going with absolute ambition for an attack on the king side. Now, out of desperation, white sacrificed the exchange here, but black didn't even take the rook, which they could have, but they just decided, let's just focus on the attack. Now, eventually they did end up taking the rook, but the attack continues, and it's to the point where white is down material, but also down the compensation, right? We're the ones still with pressure. There's ideas of f3 now, which are quite dangerous. We're threatening to just win the pawn on h3 and then checkmate. I mean, the position has completely collapsed here, to the point where already on move 20, white resigned. Now, I want to go back a moment just to see this exchange sacrifice. If white didn't go for this, because some might be wondering, why did they go for this? Why is the position so desperate? The issue is g4 comes, and it's coming with so much effect. And, you know, black is just crashing through. White is not surviving this, right? The queen is coming into the attack. There's ideas of g3 now, in fact, just trapping the bishop and opening up the f-file, and the bishop is coming in. The knight is coming to g5. I mean, this is a complete disaster for white. G3 here, it has to be played. But now we go back and just look at this bishop, hemmed in by its own pawns. There's ideas of going f3, perhaps, and just playing this more positionally, targeting the bishop. Or if they were to take, we can still go g3 and play a bit more tactically. Obviously not blundering the queen, but once we move the queen, g3 is coming, the knight is coming, and, you know, no one's surviving this attack. This is actually just -8 already for black. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's that simple. Now, there's obviously more games I could show, but if you've already followed along with the masterclass, you know the general thematic ideas with how we're developing. You know the basic ideas with attacking, moving the king, utilizing the rook, utilizing the pieces. There isn't much distinctions except for, again, those two main points I started with, which I'm going to recap here. This diagonal is very dangerous. You want to keep an eye at that at all times. And also, e5 is even more encouraged for black in these positions, because it comes with tempo, and white has not gone very ambitiously in the center. Hopefully you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you enjoyed the masterclass in total. Let me know ideas for future projects that you'd like to see, future masterclasses. Thank you for watching. Subscribe if you're new around here, and I'll see you guys next time. Peace out.